forgot my key.
Jenny, I'm sorry.
Don't. Love means never having to say you're sorry.
We all remember that line, love means never having to say you're sorry. That's a lie. Love means having to say you're sorry a lot. Love may mean having to say you're sorry even if you didn't do anything. Marriage will teach you that. We're going to do somewhat of a word study. Get a little technical, and I don't want to lose you in the technicality. When we look at words, some of our more familiar words like church, apostle, evangelist, gospel, bishop, and the word love. None of these words were created or invented by Jesus or the Apostle Paul. These were all very common words that everybody in that time and culture spoke and understood. Now for us, a lot of these are very churchy words. We don't know what they are outside of the Christian church environment. The evangelist, that's totally Christian. Gospel, that's totally Christian. But they're not invented words by Christians. They existed before Christianity. For instance, the word church. When Jesus says, upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it, nobody looked at each other and said, what's a church? They understood what a church was. They quickly identified with what Jesus was talking about. So, too, when it comes to the word love, what we have to understand is that Hebrew, Greek, and English are not divine languages. They were common languages that people spoke or now speak English. They didn't start in heaven. So when they use words such as love and these other words, they were common and they had a particular meaning to the people that were using them before the church kind of took over the word and has encapsulated the meaning of those words. What you want to understand is that concepts are more important than words. Now again, there are certain people that feel like, well, you gotta get the original Greek if you really want to understand something. I don't necessarily agree with that because you're assuming that original Greek somehow is a supernatural language. It's a language that God speaks. It's a language that started in heaven. Now, there's nothing wrong with Greek words, and we're going to look at some Greek words. But understand that simply knowing a word in Greek or Hebrew does not mean that you have any more of a better understanding of what that word means. It just means you know another word in another language. For instance, concepts are more important than words. Look at the story of the prodigal son. One of the best illustrations of love, a father's love for a long-lost son. The word love doesn't appear in the parable at all. And yet, the concept of love is all through the parable. So don't fall in love with Greek and Hebrew words. Again, nothing wrong with studying them, knowing them, and we're going to do that. But understand, concepts are more important. When it comes to the word love, in the English, we have one word, love. What we do is we will add different things to it to exemplify what that word means. So for instance, we talk about puppy love. It's a way of describing a certain kind of love. Or we would say brotherly love. I love you like a brother. A very common phrase that goes around now is I love you, but I'm not in love with you. And any guy knows that when a woman says, I love you, but I'm not in love with you, she doesn't love you. Just kind of a nice way of saying that. But that's what we do with the English word love. We have to kind of explain it or put something with it to capture the kind of love that we're talking about. Now, in the Greek language, there's actually 4 different words for love. There is eros, storge, phileo, and agape. So Greek has 4 different words for love. Now again, don't let that impress you because German has something like 16 different words for love. Again, concepts are more important than words. But let's look at these 4 words. Eros comes from the Greek god Eros. He was the god of love, but Eros refers to, we get the word erotic. It refers to sexual love or romantic love. Eros is a Greek god, and in the Roman version, he is Cupid. And that's why we see him on Valentine's Day. Eros does not appear anywhere in the Bible. It appears in the Greek Old Testament twice, but in the New Testament does not occur at all. And it refers to physical, sexual love. The next word is storge. And storge means affection. It's where we get the myth of the stork from this Greek word. Storge appears a couple of times, but it actually appears in the reverse or in the negative, meaning no love or unlove. So in different versions, undiscerning, untrustworthy, unloving, unforgiving, unmerciful, there is the word storge. Another version, they have no understanding, no fidelity, no love. The word there is storge. Again, without love, unforgiving, slanderous. Another translation, unloving, unforgiving, slanderous. So that's the 2 times that the word storge appears in the New Testament. The big words here, of course, are phileo and agape. Now, again, let me get a little technical here. When we look at Greek words, they have a root part of the word, but the endings may vary. In a similar sense, for instance, the English word go. We say, I go, he goes, I am going, I went. So you have different spellings, but it's still the same root word. So in the same way, you have this in the Greek language. So when I put up certain words, you're going to say, well, that's not spelled right. Well, again, you have to consider the root and the tense that it uses. With phileo, we get a lot of familiar words with that. Of course, there's Philadelphia, brotherly love. Philanthropist, love of men. Philosophy, love of wisdom. Pedophilia. Theophilus. The Gospel of Luke was written to a person by the name of Theophilus. You most excellent Theophilus, which means lover of God. The book of Acts, which is part 2 of Luke, likewise written to Theophilus, lover of God. Now, we often think that phileo is not used when referring to God's love, but that's actually not true. There's a lot of verses that speak about the love of God using the word phileo. For instance, in John 5:20, the Father loves the Son. With what kind of love? With phileo. And shows him all things that he himself does. Again, the Father himself loves you. The word used there is phileo. Because you have loved me. Same word. But when the kindness and the love of God, our Savior, toward men appear. Again, here's the word phileo. So it is incorrect to think that only agape refers to godly love. There's a lot of Bible verses that talk about a pure godly love using the word phileo. If anyone does not love the Lord Jesus Christ, what word are they using here? Again, phileo. Let him be accursed, O Lord, come. So let's not underestimate the meaning of phileo. It is a powerful word. It's a pure love. It's a love that God has for us. It's a love that we ought to have toward God, and a love that we ought to have for each other. Now we get to the big word. Many Christians, evangelicals are aware with this: agape love. For God so loved the world. The word there is agape, that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. What kind of love does God have? We say he has agape love. In the famous love chapter of 1 Corinthians 13, if I speak in the tongues of men or of angels but do not have love, again, the word agape, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. Love is patient. Love is kind, does not envy, does not boast, is not proud. And these three remain: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. So the word agape is used throughout the 13th chapter, the famous love chapter. So that brings us to the word agape. Now, when we think about agape, three common definitions are usually offered. Agape is godly love, the kind of love that God has. Unlike human love, God's love is agape. Another definition is agape love is unconditional love. Another, agape love is sacrificial love. There are challenges to these definitions, and we need to understand where some of these phrases come from. For instance, unconditional love really didn't show up until the 60s. It was not a word that you read about in the Apostolic Fathers or Ignatius. It's not an ancient phrase. It's a relatively modern phrase. It was popularized by guys like Erich Fromm, a philosopher and a psychologist, and the Maharishi. This is where that phrase of unconditional love actually came from. It was not a commonly used word. It's not an ancient word. You don't see Martin Luther using unconditional love or John Calvin. It's a modern term. Now, the way to verify the validity of a definition or a description is if you can use these phrases and substitute them in a verse that uses agape love. For example, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. Well, could we say, for God so loved the world with a godly love that he gave his only begotten Son? That works. That's not bad. Could we say, God so loved the world with an unconditional love that he gave his only begotten Son? That works too. Could we say, for God so loved the world with a sacrificial love that he gave his only begotten Son? Well, that really works. So with that, it sounds like agape can mean any one of those things. However, I would suggest to you that that can be extremely limited, and it does not always work. Therefore, it does not capture the best of definitions for agape love. How do I show this? Well, let's look at the Septuagint version. The Septuagint version, sometimes you see it like that. The Septuagint version is the Greek Old Testament of the Bible. It's the Greek Old Testament. It was a time when all of the world was speaking Greek. The Hebrew scholars took the Old Testament, which was written in Hebrew, some Aramaic, but Hebrew, and they translated it into Greek. So now what that means is we want to find out what Greek words did they use for love. Well, there's a story of David's son, Ammon and Tamar. They had different mothers. Ammon was one of the sons, and he falls in love with his half-sister. And it was an illicit love. He was sickly in love with her, and he ended up raping her. So we read the story of Ammon and Tamar. After this, Absalom, the son of David, had a lovely sister whose name was Tamar, and Ammon, the son of David, loved her. What word did the Greek scholars choose to use to describe this kind of love? Well, the word they used was agape. You would think that eros might have been a better phrase, but they used agape. So he loves his sister and ends up forcing himself on her and raping her. So then we read the story as it goes on. Ammon hated her exceedingly, so that the hatred which he hated her was greater than the love with which he had loved her. And Ammon said, "Arise, be gone." So understand what happens. Ammon rapes his sister, and then he turns out hating her. He's disgusted with her. And he says the fierceness of his hatred was stronger than the love that he had for her. Well, what word did they use for this? It was agape. They choose to use the word agape. They could have used eros, but they chose to use agape. We even see it in the New Testament. We have our three definitions: godly love, unconditional love, sacrificial love. But does that work every time? Here we read, "And this is the condemnation, that the light has come into the world, and men loved darkness rather than light, because their deeds were evil." What kind of love of darkness could you have? They used the word agape. Now let's do our little test. They love darkness with the godly love. Well, that doesn't work. They love darkness with unconditional love. They love darkness with the sacrificial love. Well, now those three common phrases don't actually do justice to the verse. Let's read again. "They have forsaken the right way and gone astray, following the way of Balaam, the son of Beor, who loved the wages of unrighteousness." The word agape is used. So again, did Balaam love with the godly love the wages of unrighteousness? Doesn't make sense. Did he love the wages of unrighteousness with an unconditional love? With the sacrificial love? It doesn't exactly work. One more verse. "For Demas hath forsaken me, having loved this present world." This is the word agape. So again, did Demas forsake me having a godly love for this present world? Doesn't work. Did he leave me having an unconditional love for the present world? Did he leave me having a sacrificial love for the present world? So you see, those phrases are not the best phrases to describe what agape is. To think that agape means those three things, that's the way you define agape love, it's really not very valid. Let me offer a better definition of agape love. Agape love is willful and intentional love. Willful and intentional love. Now, with that, you take some of those same verses that we looked at. After this, Absalom, the son of David, had a lovely sister whose name was Tamar. And Amnon, the son of David, loved her with a willful and intentional love. That fits a lot better than a godly love. For Demas had forsaken me, having a willful and intentional love for this present world. That's a lot better, more accurate than Demas had a sacrificial love or a godly love for the world. That is what agape love is. It's willful and intentional. And so we read it in the Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord, and thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, and with all thy might. How shall we love the Lord? With a willful and intentional love. The other half of the law of God, you have heard it said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. Again, with a willful and intentional love. But I say to you, love your enemies. How? With a willful and intentional love. So, agape love is a commitment of the will. Love is a decision, not a feeling. In a marriage, it's really no excuse to say, I've fallen out of love. Understand what you are saying, that you have made up your mind and made a decision to no longer love. Because love is not a feeling, it's a decision. It's a commitment of the will. A new commandment I give you, that you love one another as I have loved you, that you also love one another. And this is exactly what we read about the love of God. But God demonstrated his own love toward us, in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. He didn't wait for us to become lovely. He decided, he committed his love toward us.